A
I'm just reaching for
prejudiced
my
white
ID.
cop confronts a black man outside an
move.
upscale
Keep your
boutique,
hands where I can
then
see 'em.
punches and arrests him,
Put your
only
hands behind your
afterward
back. Stop
realizing
resisting.
he's assaulted
Wait, you're
the
hurting me.
city's mayor. Adrian Cole stood beneath the soft glow of a
Stop
street lamp,
resisting. Stay down on the
tugging his
car.
tailored
Get
overcoat
off of me.
into place as he waited outside the luxury shop. The store had
Stop
been
resisting.
closed for
Put your hands
hours,
behind your
its
back.
dark windows mirroring the empty sidewalk. He checked his phone, irritation simmering. His aide, Elliot, was late again, and Adrian, now in his mid-50s, hated wasting time. He leaned lightly against the cool glass, scanning the quiet street for any sign of Elliot's car, when heavy footsteps cut through the silence. "Hey!" a harsh voice barked. Adrian looked up to see a white police officer approaching, hand resting aggressively on his duty belt. The man's stare was sharp, openly suspicious, sweeping Adrian from head to polished shoes like he didn't belong there at all. Adrian straightened automatically, sliding his phone back into his pocket, shoulders squaring out of long habit. He'd seen that stance before, that cold, measuring look. "What are you doing here?" the officer demanded, accusation already baked into his tone. "Just waiting for someone," Adrian answered evenly, keeping his voice controlled. The officer stopped a few feet away, eyes narrowing as he took in the deserted street and dark storefront, as though it confirmed his worst assumptions. "Waiting? At this hour? Outside a closed designer store?" the officer pressed, skepticism dripping from every word. "That's right," Adrian replied calmly. "My ride is running late." The officer's jaw tightened, his fingers inching closer to the heavy flashlight on his belt. "Doesn't look right to me. You sure you're not loitering? Maybe planning something else?" A flicker of anger stirred in Adrian's chest, but he forced his expression to stay neutral, refusing to be baited. "I'm not loitering," Adrian said, each word deliberate. "I'm waiting for a ride, nothing more than that." The officer's lips twisted into a humorless half-smile that never reached his eyes. "Standing around in a suite, huh? Big night out? Trying to look important?" Adrian met his gaze, irritation sparking, but kept his tone steady. "I'm just waiting, officer. There's nothing else happening here." The cop took another step closer, his presence swelling, trying to dominate the space. "Doesn't feel that way to me," the officer replied, voice low. "You don't exactly blend in around here, standing by yourself this late. You sure you're not planning to break into something?" Adrian felt his pulse pick up. He'd stood in scenes like this before, where explanations meant nothing and bias outweighed logic. "There's no need for accusations," he said, jaw tight. "I'm not breaking into anything. I told you why I'm here." The officer remained planted, eyes locked on Adrian, like he was waiting for the slightest misstep. "You got any ID on you?" he asked, the words more command than question. Adrian's jaw clenched. He wasn't about to surrender every ounce of dignity. "I don't need to show you my ID. I'm not doing anything wrong." The officer's face darkened, hand hovering closer to his belt. "You don't get to decide that. When I ask for ID, you hand it over." "Or is there something you're hiding?" the officer added, voice sharpening. Adrian drew in a slow breath, frustration crowding his restraint. "I've already told you what I'm doing. That should be enough. There's no reason for this to go any further." The officer shifted his stance, voice dropping into something colder. "I decide how far this goes, not you. And right now, you're giving me plenty of reasons to keep asking questions." The air between them grew heavy. Adrian stood rigid, trying to keep his composure as the officer refused to step back. Minutes crawled by. Elliot still nowhere in sight. The tension hovered like static, wrapping the empty street in a suffocating hush. The street lamp cast long, warped shadows behind them. Adrian knew the officer wasn't done, that this wasn't going to dissolve with a simple explanation. The cop's hand rested firmly on his belt, his stare pinned to Adrian's face, like a threat. "I've explained myself," Adrian said again, voice tight but controlled, the strain beginning to leak through. "I'm waiting for someone. That's all. There's no reason for this." The officer stepped closer, the leather on his belt creaking softly as he moved. "I don't care what you've said," he replied, dripping condescension. "Something about you just doesn't sit right with me." Adrian's fists clenched at his sides. "What exactly doesn't sit right? The suit or the fact you think I don't belong?" The officer's eyes flashed with anger. "Watch your tone!" he snapped. "I'm the one asking questions here, not you!" Adrian's pulse hammered, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You've questioned me for no reason. You've watched me stand here 10 minutes. If I were doing anything wrong, you'd have seen it by now." The officer's mouth curled into a sneer. "Oh, I've seen enough. Guys like you always think you're too slick to get caught." "You think I don't know what I'm looking at?" the officer went on. "Loitering, scouting for a chance to slip into a place like this." Adrian's patience finally snapped. "Loitering? That's what you call this?" "I'm waiting for my assistant." "That's it. You've been circling me like a hawk, looking for any excuse to turn this into something ugly." The officer's smirk vanished, replaced by a hardened glare. "I'm doing my job, keeping people like you from causing trouble." Adrian stepped forward, his voice suddenly icy. "People like me? What exactly does that mean?" The officer's voice shot up. "You know damn well what I mean. You act calm like you're innocent, but I've seen this game before. A suit doesn't change who you are." Adrian's heart pounded, anger boiling. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," the officer spat. "You're just another mouthy guy who thinks he can talk his way out of trouble." Adrian inhaled sharply, trying to keep a grip on his temper. "I haven't done anything wrong. You're the one manufacturing trouble." The officer's hand slid toward his cuffs, eyes narrowing. "You're real close to stepping over the line." Adrian's gaze sharpened. "What line is that?" "The line where I stop letting you push me around for standing on a public sidewalk." The officer's grip on the cuffs tightened. "You think you're clever? You think you can mouth off to me?" "I'm the one with the authority here, not you," the cop hissed. Adrian felt heat rush through his veins, but he held his ground. "Authority doesn't give you a license to harass people for no reason." The officer closed the gap entirely, now inches from Adrian's face. "I don't need a reason if I feel threatened," he said, "and right now, I don't like the way you're talking to me." Adrian could feel things sliding dangerously out of control. The officer's aggression climbed with every sentence, but Adrian refused to fold. "You feel threatened?" Adrian asked, disbelief cutting through his words. "I'm standing here unarmed, waiting for a ride. You're the one threatening arrest. That's not how this works." The officer's jaw flexed, hand hovering over the cuffs. "I'll decide how this works. You're done talking." Adrian squared his shoulders, meeting the officer's stare head-on. I'm not done until you stop treating me like a criminal." The officer's eyes burned with fury. Without another warning, he lunged for his cuffs. "That's it! You're under arrest!" Adrian's heart slammed in his chest as he watched the metal flash under the streetlight. This was really happening. Instinct surged before logic could catch up. He stepped back quickly, raising his hands. "You can't do this," he said, voice sharp, anger and fear mixing. "I haven't broken any law." But the officer only tightened his grip. The cop's fingers clamped down on Adrian's arm. "You just crossed the line," he growled. "Don't resist." Adrian jerked his arm away, adrenaline roaring in his ears. "I'm not resisting, but you're not arresting me for nothing." The officer's patience snapped. He lunged again, this time with more force, seizing Adrian's wrist and yanking him forward. "You think you're above the law?" he snarled. "Think again." Adrian fought to pull free. "Get your hands off me." "You want to resist? Fine," the officer spat, rage coating every word. He shoved Adrian hard against the boutique window, the glass rattling with the impact. Adrian's shoulder slammed into the cold surface, pain bursting down his side. "I said get off!" Adrian groaned, struggling to twist away. His muscles locked with adrenaline. The officer leaned in closer, pressing his weight into Adrian's back, breath hot against Adrian's neck. "I told you to stop resisting," he growled. Adrian's breath came in harsh bursts as he tried to push the officer off. His mind raced, trying to understand how a simple wait for a ride had exploded into this. "I'm not resisting," he gasped. "You're the one going too far." The cop's grip tightened, fingers digging bruises into Adrian's arm. "That's it! I'm done playing with you." Without warning, the officer cocked his fist and drove it into Adrian's jaw. A brutal, bone-rattling blow. Adrian's head snapped sideways, white pain exploding through his face as he reeled against the glass. His vision wavered, the street smearing around him. A ragged gasp escaped his throat as his hand flew to his jaw, the sting pulsing through his skull. "You just had to push it," the officer muttered, voice cold. He grabbed Adrian again, this time slamming him face first into the window even harder. "Now you're going to learn your lesson." Adrian groaned as his chest was crushed against the glass, the surface unforgiving against his ribs. The officer's hands clamped around his arms, wrenching them behind his back. "You can't do this," Adrian panted, fighting to pull in steady breaths through the pain. "Watch me," the officer snarled, snapping the cuffs shut around his wrists. The metal bit into skin, sending another jolt of pain up his arms. Adrian's body sagged slightly, cheek pressed to the cold pain. "On the ground," the officer ordered, yanking Adrian backward from the window and shoving him toward the pavement. Adrian stumbled, barely catching himself before his knees smashed into the concrete. He knelt, wrists bound, chest heaving. His jaw throbbed with each breath, and his thoughts skittered in chaotic bursts. He'd done nothing, absolutely nothing to deserve this. Yet here he was, cuffed on a sidewalk, attacked by someone sworn to protect. The officer loomed over him, chest heaving with pent-up rage. "Maybe next time you'll think twice about resisting," the cop said, voice dripping contempt. Adrian looked up through blurred vision, pain radiating through his face, but his voice came out firm, laced with steel. "You're going to regret this," the officer sneered, towering above him, suddenly aware of the cuffs he'd so quickly snapped on. "Not as much as you will," he shot back. The night pressed in, cold and heavy. But Adrian knew, deep down, this wasn't the end. The officer hauled Adrian to his feet, the cuffs grinding into his wrists as he pushed him towards the patrol car. Adrian's jaw burned with every step, his body tight with pain and anger, yet beneath it, something steadier began to rise. The officer strutted forward, confident and self-satisfied, yanking open the back door with a sharp motion. "Get in!" he ordered. "I warned you." Adrian didn't move. Instead, he straightened, drew a breath, and let a small, knowing smile touch his lips. "Before you shoved me into that car," Adrian said, voice calm but edged with challenge, "why don't you check my ID?" The officer froze, hand still gripping the door. "What are you talking about?" Adrian's smile sharpened. "You heard me. My wallet's in my pocket. Check it. You're going to want to know who you just cuffed before this gets worse." The officer hesitated, suspicion warring with sudden unease, but reached toward Adrian's pocket anyway. "You had plenty of chances to give me your ID," the officer grumbled. "Now you want to cooperate?" Adrian held his gaze steadily. "Check it. Trust me, you'll regret it if you don't." The officer pulled out the wallet, flipped it open, and slid out the ID. For a beat, his expression stayed blank. Then the color drained from his face. His eyes darted from the card to Adrian. You're... "That's right," Adrian said smoothly. "I'm the mayor of this city." The officer's hands trembled as the truth sank in. He just brutalized and arrested the highest elected official in town. Panic washed over his features, swallowing his earlier arrogance. He fumbled for the cuffs, fingers clumsy. "Sir, I didn't know," he stammered. "I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize," Adrian cut in, voice suddenly sharper, carrying authority that filled the empty street. "Because you didn't care. You let your prejudice steer you, and now you've trapped yourself." The officer hurried to unlock the cuffs, metal clinking loudly in the cold air. Adrian rubbed his raw wrists, anger burning behind his eyes. "You didn't mean to punch me?" he said, voice rising. "Didn't mean to slam me against that window? Didn't mean to treat me like a criminal for standing on a sidewalk?" The officer stumbled over his words. "Sir, I thought you were—" "You thought!" Adrian snapped again. "That's the problem. You didn't think at all." "You saw me standing there," Adrian continued, stepping forward, "and because I didn't fit your idea of who belongs in that neighborhood at night, you decided I was a threat." The officer's face flushed with shame. He looked smaller now, deflated. "Sir, I'm sorry. I never intended—" "Do you have any idea what kind of mess you've created for yourself?" Adrian demanded. "Do you understand the fallout from what you did tonight?" The officer swallowed hard. "I made a mistake," he whispered. I misread the situation." "A mistake?" Adrian echoed, voice low and lethal. "You think that word fixes this? An apology doesn't erase what you did." The officer couldn't lift his eyes to meet Adrian's. His confidence had completely collapsed. Adrian exhaled slowly, trying to leash his fury. "I want your badge number," he said finally. The officer recited it in a shaky voice, while Adrian typed it into his phone. When he finished, Adrian looked up, his expression set in stone. "You'll be hearing from me," he said, "and next time, you won't walk away from something like this so easily." With that, he turned and walked off, leaving the officer rooted to the spot, hollowed by fear and dawning regret. As Adrian moved down the quiet street, his mind was already shifting ahead. This wasn't just a personal affront. It was a symptom of something far larger and rotten. The night air felt sharp against Adrian's bruised jaw as he walked. Elliot's absence, now irrelevant, compared to what had just occurred. The faint sting of the cuffs on his wrists lingered, but it was the anger underneath that propelled his steps. He couldn't let this slide. He pulled out his phone, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. He quickly dialed a familiar number, shoulders squaring as the line rang in his ear, tying him back to his office. "Elliot," he said. As soon as his aide answered, his tone clipped. "I need you at City Hall, now!" Elliot's voice came through, confused and worried. "What happened? I was just—" "I'll explain when you get there," Adrian cut in. "Just come as fast as you can." He ended the call, slipped his phone away, and headed towards City Hall. Streetlights stretched his shadow in front of him as the memory of his own reflection, cuffed, bruised, humiliated, burned into his mind. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what this represented. Unchecked power, blatant profiling, a total lack of basic respect. He'd seen this story play out for others too many times. Tonight, the system had turned on the very person charged with reforming it. By the time he reached City Hall, the decision had hardened inside him. Elliot was already outside, worry etched across his face. "What happened?" he asked. "You sounded different on the phone." Adrian paused, steadying himself. "I was harassed and assaulted by one of our officers," he said flatly. "I was almost arrested for standing on a sidewalk." Elliot's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're kidding!" "I wish I were," Adrian replied. "He had no idea who I was, just assumed I was up to something because I was in a wealthy neighborhood after dark." Elliot shook his head slowly. "I don't even know what to say." "What are we going to do?" "We're going to act," Adrian said, voice firm. "I've talked about reform long enough. Now I have proof, personal, undeniable proof, that this isn't theoretical." Elliot's gaze sharpened. "So what's the move?" "First," Adrian said, "we file a formal complaint. I have his badge number. Then we go straight to the police chief. This has to be handled at the highest level. That officer has to face real consequences." "And beyond him?" Elliot asked. "Because this goes deeper than one man." Adrian's jaw tightened as he replayed the officer's dismissive smirk, the casual brutality. "This is going to be the catalyst," he said. "I've been pushing for departmental reform for months. Now I have leverage. If we have to, we'll take this public. People deserve to know this kind of behavior won't be tolerated." Elliot nodded, expression solemn. "I'm with you, whatever it takes." "Good," Adrian said, "because the department will push back. That officer will try to spin everything. We won't retreat." Elliot studied him for a moment. "Are you okay? Physically, I mean." Adrian lifted a hand to his jaw, flinching slightly at the lingering tenderness. "I'll be fine," and he said, "This isn't the first hit I've taken, but this is different, bigger. We have to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Elliot nodded. "Then let's get started." As they stepped into City Hall, the humiliation of earlier began to harden into purpose. The fight for meaningful change had officially begun. The next morning, Adrian walked into the police precinct, his jaw still aching, a faint bruise blooming along his cheek. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, stretching pale rectangles across the tiled floor. Elliot trailed close behind, his expression set. They moved together toward the front desk. The officer there looked up, recognizing Adrian immediately, posture straightening. "I'm here to see Chief Price," Adrian said, voice calm but immovable. The desk officer's gaze darted nervously to Adrian's injury. "Yes, sir," the man replied quickly, reaching for the phone. He murmured into the receiver, and within minutes, Chief Donovan Price emerged from the back. Price was a tall, thick-shouldered man in his late 50s, gray threading through close-cropped hair, his manner usually steady and controlled. Today, his eyes flicked immediately to Adrian's jaw, his expression darkening. "Mayor Cole," he said, extending a hand. Adrian ignored it. "Come to my office," Price added. "We need to talk about last night." They followed him down a long hallway, the silence inside the station suddenly heavy. Price's footsteps echoed with practiced authority. Inside his office, he motioned toward two chairs. Adrian remained standing. Elliot did too. "I understand there was an incident last night," Price began, his tone neutral. But something defensive lurked underneath. "Incident," Adrian repeated, voice sharp. "I was harassed, struck in the face, and nearly arrested while waiting for a ride. That's more than an incident." Before Price could respond, the door opened. Officer Ryan Blake stepped in, face pale, shoulders rigid. The swagger he'd shown on the street had evaporated. He gave Adrian a quick, anxious glance before dropping his eyes to the floor. "Officer Blake," Price said, gesturing stiffly to a chair. "Have a seat. We need to clear up exactly what happened." Blake sat, back rigid, jaw tight. The weight of what he'd done pressed visibly on him, his earlier certainty gone. Adrian took a step closer, fixing his gaze on Blake. "Tell me, Officer Blake," he said, voice steady but cold. "What exactly was going through your mind last night when you ignored everything I told you and escalated a simple conversation into violence?" Blake shifted in his seat, throat tightening. I didn't know who you were," he muttered. You thought you had the right to treat me like a criminal because I didn't fit your expectations." Adrian cut in. "You didn't care about the truth," Adrian continued. Price's expression hardened as he turned toward Blake. "Officer Blake, you understand this behavior is unacceptable," the chief said, voice now edged with steel. "Why didn't you de-escalate?" Blake's gaze flicked between them. "I made a mistake," he mumbled. "I thought he was—" "You didn't know, because you didn't bother to find out," Adrian said, voice rising. "You let your prejudice make decisions for you. And when I challenged you, you chose violence." Blake swallowed hard, looking sick. I'm sorry," he whispered. "Sorry," Adrian echoed, his tone cutting. "Sorry doesn't undo a punch. Sorry doesn't erase the fact you threw me against a window and cuffed me for standing on a sidewalk." Blake's shoulders sagged. Price leaned forward, folding his hands. "Officer Blake, you crossed a serious line. I've already placed you on suspension pending an internal investigation." Blake opened his mouth, but Price's stare froze his protest before it formed. Blake's eyes dropped to the floor again. Any lingering bravado had vanished, replaced by stark remorse and fear. "You didn't just assault me," Adrian said, his voice steady but fierce. "You violated your oath. You swore to protect this community, not terrorize it. I'm one man in a suit. Imagine how you treat people without a title." Price nodded, tone grave now. "Your actions betrayed the standards of this department, officer. There will be consequences, serious ones." Blake's lips parted as if to argue, but nothing came out. The reality of his situation had silenced him. Adrian turned back to Price. "This isn't just about one officer," he said. "This is about the culture in your department that allows officers like him to believe this kind of behavior is acceptable. He didn't see me as a person, just a problem, That's systemic. That's bigger than one suspension. Price's jaw tightened. I understand your anger, Mayor Cole. I'm committed to addressing this, Price added carefully. Adrian crossed his arms. Addressing it isn't enough. There needs to be transparency. This can't disappear into some quiet internal file. I want a full report of this investigation made public. People need to see exactly how this is handled. Price's expression grew more guarded, but he kept his tone controlled. We'll ensure the investigation is thorough, he said. Appropriate action will be taken. Adrian stepped closer to the desk, voice dropping. This is bigger than one ugly night, Chief, Adrian said. It's about whether this department has a future the community can trust. If real reforms don't happen, if this is brushed aside, I'll make sure the public knows. This city deserves better than officers who profile and brutalize first, then ask questions later. Price held his gaze for a long moment. Finally, he nodded once. Understood, he said quietly. The message between them was unmistakable. This wouldn't vanish quietly. Adrian looked at Blake one last time. You thought you held all the power, he said, voice quieter but still unyielding. You assumed you could treat me however you wanted and walk away. Now you know that isn't true. There will be consequences for you and for the way this department operates. Blake couldn't meet his eyes. Without another word, Adrian turned and headed for the door. Elliot followed, as the room's tension seemed to press against their backs. Outside, the air felt marginally lighter, but Adrian knew the fight was just beginning. Accountability had been set in motion, yet true reform was still far off. As they walked to the car, Elliot finally spoke. You think they'll actually follow through? He asked. Adrian slid into the driver's seat, fingers tightening around the wheel. They won't have a choice, he said. This isn't something they can bury. Not this time. Not with me involved, and not with the truth on our side. Elliot still looked troubled. What if they just make Blake the fall guy? He asked. Suspend him, maybe fire him, but leave everything else the same. Adrian shook his head. Oh, we're not letting that happen. We're going to stay ahead of this. As they drove through the city, Adrian's thoughts raced. His reform agenda could no longer wait. We have to control the narrative, he said. This story is going to explode. People should hear it from me first. By the time they pulled up to City Hall, Adrian had already formed his next steps. He strode into his office and glanced at the clock. Get the press lined up, he told Elliot. I want a news conference this afternoon. No delays. We'll lay out what happened, what steps have been taken, and commit to full transparency. Elliot began making calls. You're telling them everything? He asked. Adrian hesitated, then nodded. They're getting the truth. All of it. On our terms. A lot still needed to happen, but Adrian knew one thing for sure. People had to hear exactly what Officer Blake had done and why it was wrong. Within hours, the media swarmed the steps of City Hall. Reporters, cameras, and residents filled the plaza, a low buzz of speculation hanging in the air. Elliot stepped in again, phone in hand. They're all set outside. Press is waiting. You sure you want to lay everything out? Adrian adjusted his tie in the mirror, his mid-50s face marked by the fading bruise along his jaw. It's the only way they'll understand how serious this is, he said quietly. Elliot nodded. Then let's go. As Adrian stepped out of City Hall and approached the podium, the crowd fell into a tense hush. Camera flashes popped, microphones pushed forward, every eye locked on him. He drew a steady breath, feeling the full weight of the moment. "Good afternoon," Adrian began, voice calm but unshakable. "I've called this press conference to address an incident that occurred last night involving one of our city's police officers and myself." The crowd shifted, tension rising, as people leaned closer. "Last night, I was standing outside a store, waiting for my ride, when I was approached by an officer on patrol. Despite my calm explanation, the officer grew increasingly hostile. He made assumptions about who I was and why I was there." Adrian paused, letting the words sink in. "He accused me of loitering, of being up to no good, simply because I didn't match his idea of who belonged in that neighborhood. When I calmly tried to explain myself again, things escalated. He struck me in the face, put me in handcuffs, and was moments away from shoving me into the back of his patrol car." A shocked murmur rolled through the crowd, outrage and disbelief mixing in their faces. "At no point did I resist," Adrian continued, his voice gaining force. "I remained calm, clear, and respectful. None of that mattered. What mattered to him was what he decided when he first looked at me, not my words, not my explanation. He saw a threat and acted on that assumption." He glanced toward Elliot, who gave a small, encouraging nod. Adrian faced the crowd again, his tone steady but burning with conviction, refusing to dilute the truth. "It wasn't until I told him to check my ID," Adrian said, "that everything changed. The moment he realized who I was, his entire demeanor shifted. Panic set in. He fumbled with the cuffs, tripped over apologies, desperate to undo what he'd already done. But this was never just about me." He leaned slightly toward the microphones, hands gripping the sides of the podium. "This is about deep, systemic problems in our police department that we can't ignore. This is not only about one officer," Adrian emphasized. "It's about a culture that allows those assumptions to flourish. A system where people are treated as suspects based on how they look rather than what they actually do. That's exactly what we've been struggling to change." The plaza grew silent, the usual background noise replaced by a focused stillness. "There will be a full investigation into this officer's conduct," Adrian continued, "and I will personally oversee its transparency. Residents of this city deserve to know what happens inside their police department," he said. "I will not allow this to become another story that fades from the headlines without consequences." He let his gaze sweep across the cameras. "But this goes far beyond one night. This moment is about real, lasting reform in our police force. I've fought for change for years. Last night, I experienced firsthand why that fight can't wait. No one should endure what I did." Reporters began shouting questions, voices overlapping in a chaotic wave, demanding names, timelines, and outcomes. Adrian raised his hand, signaling for quiet. "There will be more details as the investigation progresses," he said. "But understand this. This is not an ending. This is the start of meaningful change. I will not stop until every person in this city, no matter their background, neighborhood, or income, can trust that officers will treat them fairly and with respect." With that, Adrian stepped away from the podium. At the bottom of the steps, Elliot met him, face serious. "That was intense," he murmured. "But you said what needed to be said." Adrian nodded, exhaling. "This city needs to wake up. We've talked about reform long enough. Now we actually have to do it." As they walked back into City Hall, the weight of leadership pressed harder on Adrian's shoulders. But alongside it came something else. A sharpened sense of purpose. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Later, Adrian sat in his office, staring out at the skyline through wide windows. The press conference had rattled the city's power structure. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Calls from council members, neighborhood groups, clergy, and everyday residents. People wanted answers, demanded action, or offered support. The city was finally stirring, but he knew the path ahead would be grueling. Elliot stepped in again, phone in hand. "You're everywhere," he said. "Social media, cable news, local radio. Everyone's talking." "Good," Adrian replied, rubbing his temples. "We need that pressure to keep building. I want people to understand how serious this is." Elliot nodded, moving closer to the desk. "I've spoken with several community leaders. They're ready to stand behind you, but they're expecting something concrete in return. They want to know exactly what reforms you're planning to push." Adrian nodded slowly, mind already churning. "We start with the investigation into Officer Blake, but that's only step one. We need meaningful structural changes," Adrian continued. "More oversight, real de-escalation training, and strict accountability measures." Elliot's expression tightened. "I agree. But you know the police union is going to fight every inch. They're already reacting to your statement, saying you're judging too quickly." Adrian's voice hardened. "I don't care what the union says. If they won't clean house from the inside, we'll force reform from the outside." This isn't fading away quietly. Before Elliot could respond, there was a knock. Adrian's assistant stepped in. "Mayor Cole, Chief Price is here to see you." Adrian exchanged a look with Elliot, then nodded. "Send him in." Chief Donovan Price entered, his usually confident stride noticeably subdued. He offered a brief, tight nod before sitting across from Adrian. An awkward silence hung in the air as their eyes met. "Mayor Cole," Price began carefully, "I saw your press conference. We should discuss where we go from here." Adrian leaned forward, hands clasped on the desk. "What's there to debate? The officer's behavior was indefensible. The investigation needs to move quickly, and there must be real consequences." Price shifted in his seat. "I agree that Officer Blake's conduct warrants a thorough review, and we've already suspended him while that happens. But you understand these processes take time. We can't rush to judgment." Adrian's expression hardened. "I'm not asking for a rush. I'm demanding visible accountability." "People need to see this handled out in the open," Adrian pressed. "That means no stalling, no excuses." Price's brow furrowed. "I've been with this department over 30 years. I understand how fragile public trust is, especially now. But we still have to follow proper procedures." Adrian took a slow breath, keeping his voice even. "Chief, this goes beyond procedure. It's about rebuilding trust you've already lost. Blake's actions are part of a larger pattern. You know that as well as I do. Complaints about bias stops and unnecessary force have been landing on my desk for years," Adrian continued. "Most never go anywhere." Price's jaw tightened. "I'm aware of the concerns, but sweeping reforms don't happen overnight." "I'm not asking for overnight change," Adrian replied, his tone rising. "But we can't sit on our hands while your department bleeds credibility. The era of tiny, cosmetic fixes is over. We need comprehensive reform, and we need it now." Price studied him, expression unreadable. After a long pause, he asked, "What specifically are you proposing?" Adrian sat back, organizing his thoughts quickly. "First, We form an independent oversight commission outside the department. They review misconduct complaints and issue disciplinary recommendations. Second, mandatory de-escalation and anti-bias training for every officer, no exceptions. Third, a public reporting system so residents can track complaints and investigations themselves. Price raised an eyebrow, clearly weighing the impact. An outside oversight commission, Price said. You realize the union will fight that relentlessly. Adrian nodded. They can fight. This is non-negotiable. People need to see that accountability isn't some internal secret. We can't keep handling misconduct quietly behind closed doors. Price sighed, rubbing the back of his neck like a man feeling years of strain. You're asking for a lot. I'm asking for what's necessary, Adrian replied firmly. Not for me. For everyone who lives here. This isn't about patching up what happened to me, Adrian added. It's about making sure it never happens to anyone else. Price looked down at his hands for a long moment, weighing political pressure against departmental loyalty. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened. I understand where you're coming from, and I agree some changes are overdue. I'll bring this to our leadership team. But you should be ready for backlash from the union and from officers who feel targeted. Adrian leaned in, eyes fixed on him. This isn't about targeting officers. It's about improving the force. If any cop feels threatened by basic accountability, maybe they shouldn't be wearing a badge. Price's lips thinned, but he nodded. I'll present your proposals and see what we can implement. As he stood to leave, Adrian remained seated, watching him closely. Remember, Chief, Adrian said quietly, the entire city is watching us right now. Don't waste this chance. Price paused at the doorway, then turned back. I won't, he said, his tone more genuine than before. Like it or not, we're in this together. After he left, the room fell silent. Elliot let out a long breath. You think he'll actually follow through? He asked. Adrian rubbed his jaw, still tender. He'll have to. We've come too far for this to fall apart. Elliot nodded slowly. So what's the next move? Adrian stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Next, we keep pushing. We rally community groups. We stay visible. We keep pressure on until those reforms are written into policy. This was never just about one officer. It's about reshaping an entire system. Elliot crossed his arms, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. Sounds like you're ready for a long fight. Adrian's smile was grim. I've been ready for years. The following day, Adrian wasted no time pressing forward. The press conference had lit a fire across the city. People were talking in barbershops, office break rooms, and neighborhood centers. Every local station ran segments on policing and bias. Pressure on the department grew, and Adrian knew a resistance from the union and some officials would soon peak. In his office, he stood over a stack of documents outlining his proposed reforms when Elliot walked in, looking focused and tense. I just got off calls with several council members, Elliot said. The public's behind your reforms, but the usual holdouts are nervous. They're worried about backlash from the union. Adrian nodded. I expected that. Who's pushing hardest? The councilors closest to the union leadership, Elliot replied. They're hedging, talking about balance and not overreacting. Adrian checked his watch. We need these proposals on the council's agenda today. If we hesitate, momentum evaporates. Elliot glanced at his tablet. Chief Price released a statement a few minutes ago, he said. He's backing the investigation, but says reforms can't weaken officers' ability to do their jobs. Adrian's jaw tightened. That's code for "we plan to stall." Elliot nodded. Pretty much. But community groups are lining up. I've gotten calls from advocacy organizations and local faith leaders all morning. People want action. Then we give them action, Adrian replied. Schedule a meeting, council and union together. Within hours, Adrian stood in a packed conference room inside City Hall. The air was thick with tension. On one side of the long table sat city council members, expressions ranging from wary to firmly supportive. On the other side were representatives of the police union, Chief Price, and several senior officers. The union president, a stocky man in his early 60s named Frank Doyle, sat with arms crossed, staring daggers across the room as the meeting began. After a few formal remarks, Adrian cut straight to the core. "We're not here to argue whether reform is needed," he said, voice clear. "The residents have spoken. They want accountability. The current system is failing them. We're obligated to fix it." Doyle shifted in his chair. "Mayor Cole, we've always tried to work with City Hall, but some of these measures will tie our officers' hands. We can't let that happen." His tone carried practiced indignation. Adrian leaned forward. "This isn't about handcuffing officers. It's about holding them to the standards we all say we support. If transparency and accountability undermine your force, the problem isn't the reform. It's the culture." Chief Price cleared his throat. "We support stronger training, especially around de-escalation. But an independent oversight commission will cause serious friction. Officers will feel second-guessed by people who've never walked their beat." Adrian's gaze hardened. "Right now, residents don't trust your internal investigations. They need a system they can believe in," Adrian continued, "and they don't believe in this one." Some council members shifted, uncomfortable but listening. Councilwoman Denise Harris leaned forward. "I agree with the mayor," she said. "If the community can't trust police to police themselves, we'll never rebuild confidence in law enforcement." Doyle's face reddened. "You're not the ones facing danger on the street," he snapped. "Our officers risk their lives daily, and you sit in offices judging them." Adrian's voice stayed cool. "What I know is this city can't afford another night like the one I just lived through, or worse. Every day we delay, someone's life is on the line. I refuse to wait until the next tragedy to act." The room fell quiet. After a moment, Chief Price spoke again, more measured. "Let's be specific. What are you asking for?" Adrian outlined the reforms, leaving no space for ambiguity or easy loopholes that could weaken them. "More independent civilian oversight," Adrian said, "mandatory racial bias and de-escalation training, public tracking of complaints and real consequences for profiling or excessive force. This isn't about appearances. It's about fixing what's broken." Doyle shot to his feet, furious. "You'll destroy morale," he snapped. "Our people already feel under attack." Adrian didn't flinch. "Morale isn't the priority when residents are being harassed, profiled, or worse. The department improves when truly dedicated officers work in a culture that holds everyone accountable." The tension climbed as union representatives whispered angrily among themselves. After several minutes, one council member suggested they move to a vote. "We've heard enough," she said. "We owe the public a decision." An hour later, the council emerged with an agreement to advance Adrian's reform package. It wasn't final, but it was a major step forward. As Adrian exited the room, Elliot caught up with him, unable to hide a small look of relief and admiration. "That was brutal," Elliot said, "but we got what we needed." "For now," Adrian replied. "The union won't roll over. They'll regroup and come back harder. We have to be ready." Elliot nodded. "So what's next?" Adrian checked his phone, already thinking ahead. "Next, we focus on the investigation. We make sure Officer Blake isn't quietly protected, and we keep pushing harder than ever. The machinery is moving, but the real fight is just getting started." Days passed, and the council's support for the reform package remained intact, but progress felt painfully slow. The police union piled on procedural challenges, trying to stretch out every step. Chief Price had grown noticeably harder to reach. Internal emails about the investigation into Officer Blake turned vague and repetitive. Every inch forward came with another excuse. Adrian felt the tension building from the public. He knew the city's patience wouldn't last, and neither would his. In his office, Adrian scanned the latest updates on the investigation. Essentially, nothing. The internal review had stalled behind bureaucratic language. Blake's name still hadn't been publicly released. Elliot walked in, frustration written across his face. "They're stalling, Adrian. Hard," he said. "This investigation should already be moving. But Price's team is tying everything up with technicalities. They're trying to wait you out." Adrian's jaw clenched. "I expected delays, but this is beyond ridiculous. The community's losing patience." "Reporters and neighborhood leaders have been calling nonstop," Elliot added. "Everyone wants to know why the officer's identity is still hidden." Adrian leaned back, weighing the risks. He'd wanted to give the department a chance to do things the right way. But it was obvious now they were dragging their feet. If he stayed quiet much longer, whatever trust remained would evaporate. "I'm done waiting," Adrian said finally, his voice steady. "If they won't act, I will." Elliot's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're thinking about naming him, going public yourself?" Adrian stood and began to pace. "The residents deserve to know who assaulted their mayor. The department is protecting him behind procedure, and that's precisely why we're here. They're banking on secrecy. I'm not giving it to them." Elliot nodded, pulling out his phone. "I'll draft a statement and alert the press. Once we release the name, every outlet in this city will jump on it." "Good," Adrian said. "Let them! I'm not letting Price or the union hide behind this investigation while everyone else waits for justice." Within an hour, Adrian was back at a podium outside City Hall. The crowd of reporters had grown even larger than before. Microphones bristled from every angle. "Good afternoon," he began. "You know we've been working toward reform in our police department. But despite commitments from leadership and the council, the investigation into one officer has stalled repeatedly. Enough." The murmuring subsided as Adrian continued. "I've waited patiently for the department to move forward. The delays have dragged on long enough. Today, I am releasing the name of the officer involved in the incident last week. His name is Officer Ryan Blake. He is the officer who unlawfully detained and assaulted me." A wave of shock rippled through the crowd as reporters scribbled notes, snapped photos, and whispered into phones, the name already racing across the city. "This is not just about me," Adrian said, his voice rising. "This is about accountability. Residents deserve transparency. They deserve to know who is responsible when misconduct occurs. Officer Blake's actions were unacceptable. The department does not get to hide his identity or delay justice indefinitely. We will not allow that." Questions flew toward him, but Adrian wasn't finished. He leaned into the cameras, determined that his message would cut through any spin or distraction. "Let me be perfectly clear," Adrian continued. "This doesn't end with one officer's name. This is about a system that has allowed officers like Blake to act without consequences for far too long. We are pushing for real reform. I will not stop until this city sees the changes it deserves." When he stepped away, the noise exploded. Reporters calling after him, phones ringing, camera crews scrambling. Elliot joined him as they headed back inside City Hall. "Now, that was bold, but absolutely necessary," Elliot said quietly. Adrian nodded. "It was our only move left. Price and the union can't hide behind ongoing investigation anymore. They'll have to respond." Within hours, every major outlet featured Officer Blake's name and face. Community reaction was immediate. Protesters gathered outside the main police station, chanting for justice and reform. Phone lines lit up. But the biggest shock arrived later that afternoon, when Elliot burst into Adrian's office, out of breath. "Price just resigned," Elliot said. Adrian looked up, stunned. "He what?" "He stepped down," Elliot repeated, "effective immediately. He released a statement saying he doesn't want to be at the center of this controversy." Adrian leaned back slowly, processing. He'd braced for a public battle, not a sudden surrender. Elliot continued. "The department's in disarray. The union's scrambling. Community leaders are demanding answers and a say in choosing the next chief." Adrian nodded, mind racing. "Good," he said. "We move faster now. No more excuses. No more foot dragging." Price's resignation marked a turning point, one Adrian hadn't expected to come so quickly, but welcome nonetheless. The department was exposed, its leadership shaken. "This is our window," Adrian said. "We push the reforms through while they're on their heels. We don't let them regroup and stall again." The road ahead was still long, but momentum had finally shifted. With Chief Price gone, the department was under more scrutiny than ever. Adrian wasted no time. The next major milestone was the Internal Review Board's decision on Officer Blake. This time, Adrian wasn't willing to simply wait for a memo. Reviewing documents in his office, he barely looked up when Elliot walked in. "The review board meets next week," Elliot reported. "They'll decide Blake's fate." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "I want to be there, in that room." Elliot blinked. "You want to sit in on the review?" he asked. "They're not going to like that. The board's usually just department brass and union reps." "Exactly," Adrian replied. "That's the problem. I've seen how internal reviews play out. They drag things out, then hand out a mild reprimand. Not this time. I'm going to be in that room, and Blake's career in this department ends there." Elliot hesitated. "You can pull that off as mayor, but the union will call it interference." Adrian was already reaching for the phone. "Let them complain. I'm going to be in that room, and Blake's career in this department ends there." By the next morning, his formal request to attend the review board meeting had been submitted, and the backlash started immediately. Union President Frank Doyle called it a dangerous political stunt. Some high-ranking officers echoed him, claiming Adrian was undermining due process. But community leaders sided strongly with Adrian, insisting on oversight and transparency. The day of the review board meeting arrived quicker than expected. Adrian entered a small conference room deep inside the department's headquarters. A long table dominated the space. Around it sat members of the review board, senior officers, a union lawyer, and Doyle himself. At the far end sat Officer Ryan Blake, looking pale but still trying to project defiance. The board's chair, Captain Lena Alvarez, in her early 60s, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat to begin. "Mayor Cole," Captain Alvarez said carefully, "we understand you've requested to observe today's proceedings." Adrian nodded, eyes momentarily resting on Blake. "I'm here because the people of this city demand accountability," he said. "Officer Blake's conduct was a gross abuse of the authority entrusted to him. I want to be certain this board makes the right call." Alvarez looked uneasy. "These reviews are typically internal. We're here to evaluate his conduct and determine appropriate disciplinary action, including possible termination." Adrian's voice remained firm. "With respect, this case goes beyond routine procedure. Officer Blake didn't just make a paperwork error. He abused his power, assaulted me, and nearly arrested me because of his bias. That's not just a departmental issue. It cuts to the core of public trust." Blake finally spoke up, voice defensive. "I did what I had to do. You were there late at night, dodging questions. I followed my training." Adrian turned toward him, expression hard. "Your training didn't tell you to ignore my answers. It didn't tell you to escalate a calm situation into violence. This wasn't about safety. It was about your assumptions." Blake shifted uncomfortably. "I've had plenty of situations where someone claims they're just waiting around and ends up being a criminal. I made a judgment call." "You made the wrong call," Adrian shot back. "Based on who I am, not what I did." The room fell quiet. Captain Alvarez broke the silence. "We'll proceed," she said, addressing the board. Over the next hours, they reviewed evidence, body camera footage, audio, incident reports, and statements. The images and recordings left little room for doubt. Adrian stayed mostly silent, but every time Blake tried to justify his actions, Adrian's anger simmered just beneath the surface. Finally, Alvarez turned back to Adrian. "Mayor Cole, before we deliberate, do you have any final remarks?" Adrian rose slowly. "I've heard enough excuses from Officer Blake today," he said, voice steady but sharp. "He has refused to take true responsibility, and that tells me everything. Residents deserve a department they can trust, one that serves without prejudice. Keeping Blake on the force would damage that trust permanently. He must be removed." Blake scowled. "You're painting me like some monster." "I didn't wake up planning to hurt anyone. I was doing my job." "Yea, if you honestly believe that was your job," Adrian replied coldly, "you should never have worn that badge." Captain Alvarez nodded, then addressed the board. "We'll deliberate now." They left for another room. An hour later, they returned, faces set. Alvarez cleared her throat. "After reviewing the evidence and testimony, we find Officer Ryan Blake in clear violation of department policy. His conduct was unprofessional and unacceptable. Effective immediately, he is terminated from this police department." Relief washed over Adrian, though he kept his expression composed. Blake rose, visibly shaken, and left the room without looking at anyone. Alvarez turned to Adrian. "Thank you for attending, Mayor. We understand how important this decision was for the city." Adrian nodded. "It was the right call. But this is only the first step. We must keep pushing reforms so this never happens again." Outside, Elliot met him with a satisfied grin. "It's done! Blake's gone," Adrian exhaled. "One battle down, many more to go. Dignity can be shattered in a single night." If you're in your late 60s or 70s, you've likely watched this country change more than once. You've seen new mayors, new slogans, new promises. But one thing hasn't changed enough: how quickly a black man's dignity can be stripped away on a quiet street. Adrian Cole wasn't some teenager in a hoodie. He was a grandfather-aged mayor in a tailored overcoat, just waiting for a ride under a street lamp. Yet to that prejudiced officer, none of that mattered. One look, one assumption, and Adrian became a suspect instead of a citizen. For many older Americans who remember dogs and fire hoses on the evening news, this scene is painfully familiar. It reminds us that no title, no success, no age can fully protect you from bias that's never been rooted out. Dignity, earned over a lifetime, can still be bruised in an instant by someone with a badge and a closed mind. When the system turns on its own, the truth is exposed. Many of you know what it feels like when institutions you trusted disappoint you. Maybe it was a church scandal, a broken pension promise, or a hospital that treated you like a number instead of a person. Adrian had spent years talking about police reform. He believed in the office he held and the city he served. Then, in one ugly encounter, the very system he was trying to fix turned its power on him. That twist pulled the curtain back. If a mayor can be slammed into a window and cuffed for standing on a sidewalk, what happens to the young man with no connections or the grandmother with no one to call? Adrian's decision to step into the precinct, face his attacker, and speak the truth in front of the chief wasn't just about his own injury. It forced the city to confront what many residents had been saying for years. The system is broken. And now everyone can see the cracks. Real reform belongs to the people, not just to leaders. Those of us in our later years understand that one speech, one press conference, one firing doesn't fix a deep problem. We've watched change get promised and quietly buried more times than we can count. Adrian's real strength wasn't only in firing Officer Blake or pushing the chief to step down. It was in inviting the whole city into the process. Press conferences, public oversight, community voices at the table. Older Americans know that lasting reform comes when ordinary people stay engaged after the cameras leave. When congregations, senior centers, veterans halls, and neighborhood groups keep asking, what's happening with those new policies? In the end, Adrian's story is not just about one bad officer losing his job. It's about everyday people insisting that their city becomes safer, fairer, and more honest for their children, grandchildren, and the generations yet to come. Friends, after hearing what happened to Mayor Adrian Cole and how he turned his own humiliation into a push for real reform, I'd love to hear from you. In all your years watching this country change, do you believe police departments can truly transform from the inside? Or does it take constant pressure from everyday people like us to keep them honest? Have you ever seen an abuse of authority in your own town or lived through something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments. And please remember to like this video, subscribe, and stay with our channel for more meaningful stories and discussions.